The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Detective Sarah Martinez pulled her unmarked sedan into the driveway of 1247 Saguaro Lane. Even at 9:30 a.m., the temperature was already climbing toward triple digits, but that wasn't what made sweat bead on her forehead. It was the call that had come in 2 hours earlier, a home invasion with a 3-year-old witness. As she stepped out of her air-conditioned car, the heat hit her like a physical wall. The Rodriguez house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where children's bicycles dotted driveways and sprinklers fought the relentless desert heat. American flags hung limp in the still air, and the only sounds were distant lawn mowers and the hum of countless air conditioning units working overtime. But 1247 Saguaro Lane told a different story. Detective Martinez had seen hundreds of break-ins during her 12 years with the Phoenix Police Department. But something about the scene immediately set her on edge. The front door stood wide open, revealing chaos within. Shattered glass from the sliding patio door glittered like diamonds. Across the terracotta tile floor, an overturned coffee table lay on its side. Magazines scattered like fallen leaves. Family photos in broken frames told the story of happier times, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. A young mother with her toddler daughter feeding ducks at a pond. Detective Martinez, a uniformed officer, approached, his notepad already filled with preliminary observations. Officer James Rodriguez, no relation to the family. The homeowner is Maria Rodriguez, 28, single mother. Works as a dental hygienist at Desert Smiles Clinic. Her daughter Emma, age 3, was home when it happened. Detective Martinez nodded, scanning the damage. What was taken? Electronics mainly. A laptop computer from the kitchen counter, a tablet, some jewelry from the master bedroom, maybe $300 in cash from a ceramic jar in the kitchen. But here's the thing, Officer Rodriguez lowered his voice. The kids saw everything. That's when Detective Martinez noticed her. In the corner of the living room, partially hidden behind an overturned armchair, sat the smallest witness she'd ever encountered. Emma Rodriguez couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds, soaking wet. Her dark curls were disheveled, and her Spider-Man pajamas were still wrinkled from sleep. She clutched a well-loved stuffed elephant to her chest, its gray fabric worn soft from countless nights of comfort. But it was Emma's eyes that stopped Detective Martinez in her tracks. They were enormous, in her small face dark brown pools that seemed to hold secrets far too heavy for someone who still needed help tying her shoes. Those eyes tracked every movement in the room with an alertness that was both impressive and heartbreaking. This wasn't the normal curiosity of a 3-year-old watching adults work. This was the hypervigilance of someone who had seen something terrible. Emma, honey, a woman's voice called from the kitchen, tied with stress and exhaustion. The nice police lady is here to talk to us. Maria Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, and Detective Martinez immediately saw where Emma got her delicate features. Maria was petite with the same dark curls as her daughter, but her usual beauty was marred by red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. She wore scrubs from work, having been called home early when the neighbors reported the break-in. I'm Detective Martinez, she said gently, extending her hand to Maria. I know this is difficult, but I need to understand exactly what happened here. Maria's composure cracked slightly. I dropped Emma off at my neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house at 7 this morning. Like always, she watches Emma until preschool starts at 9, but Emma had a stomachache, so Mrs. Patterson brought her back around 8:30. I had already left for work. Her voice broke. If I had known, this isn't your fault, Detective Martinez said firmly. Tell me about when you got home. Mrs. Patterson called me at the clinic, hysterical. She said she brought Emma back and found the sliding door smashed. Emma was in her playhouse in the backyard, that little pink castle structure you can probably see from here. She was just sitting there, not crying, not making any noise, just sitting. Detective Martinez looked through the destroyed sliding door to the small backyard. Sure enough, a child-sized plastic playhouse sat beneath a mesquite tree, its bright pink walls cheerful against the desert landscape. From that vantage point, a child would have had a clear view of anyone entering through the patio door. Has Emma said anything about what she saw? Maria shook her head, fresh tears starting. She won't talk about it. Every time I ask, she just points toward Mr. Thompson's house next door and says Batman came to play. But Mr. Thompson is 75 years old and was at his doctor's appointment when this happened. I called to check. Detective Martinez knelt down to Emma's eye level, moving slowly and keeping her voice soft. Hi Emma, I'm Detective Sarah. I help catch bad guys. Can you tell me about the bad man who came to play?" Emma's grip on her elephant tightened. She looked at Detective Martinez for a long moment. Those wise eyes seeming to weigh whether this stranger could be trusted. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shook her head and buried her face in the elephant's worn fabric. "She's been like this for 2 hours," Maria whispered. "She'll talk about everything else, her cartoons, her toys, what she wants for lunch. But the moment anyone mentions what happened, she just shuts down." Detective Martinez studied the crime scene with fresh eyes. The break-in was professional, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. The laptop had been taken from its charging station in the kitchen. The jewelry box in the master bedroom had been opened with surgical precision, expensive pieces taken while costume jewelry was left behind. Even the cash jar in the kitchen had been found quickly, despite being tucked behind a collection of cookbooks. This wasn't a random burglary by some desperate junkie looking for a quick score. This was someone who knew the house, knew the family's routines, knew where the valuable items were kept. And 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez had watched it all happen. As Detective Martinez continued her investigation, measuring distances and photographing evidence, she kept glancing back at the small girl in the corner. Emma hadn't moved from her spot, but her eyes continued their careful surveillance of every adult in the room. Occasionally, she would whisper something to her stuffed elephant, as if sharing secrets with her most trusted friend, Mrs. Rodriguez. Detective Martinez said, "I'm going to need to interview Emma properly, but not today. She's been through enough trauma for one morning. I'd like to arrange for a child psychologist to speak with her when she's had time to process this." Maria nodded gratefully. "Whatever it takes. That little girl is the only one who knows who did this to us, and whoever it was." Her voice hardened with protective fury. "They violated our home while my baby was watching. They need to pay for that." As Detective Martinez prepared to leave, she knelt down one more time beside Emma. "Hey, sweetie, I'm going to find the bad man who scared you, okay? And until I do, there are going to be police officers making sure you and Mommy stay safe." Emma looked up from her elephant, and for just a moment, Detective Martinez saw a flicker of something in those dark eyes. Not just fear, but something else. Something that looked almost like relief. As if Emma had been waiting for someone to promise they would listen to her story. "Emma," Detective Martinez said gently, "when you're ready to tell someone about the bad man, I'll be here to listen, okay?" Emma nodded once, solemnly, then returned to whispering secrets to her stuffed elephant. As Detective Martinez walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be unlike anything she'd handled before. Somewhere in that little girl's mind was the key to solving this crime. The challenge would be finding a way to unlock it without causing Emma any more trauma. The desert heat shimmered off the asphalt as she drove away, but Detective Martinez barely noticed. Her mind was already working on the problem of how to help a 3-year-old find her voice in a world that had suddenly become very scary indeed. 3 weeks had passed since the Rodriguez break-in, and Detective Sarah Martinez stared at her caseboard with the kind of frustration that made her want to throw her lukewarm coffee across the room. Red string-connected photos, witness statements, and evidence markers in what should have been a clear pattern, but instead looked like a spider web designed by someone having a nervous breakdown. The Phoenix Police Department's bullpen hummed with its usual chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the perpetual smell of burned coffee mingling with the industrial disinfectant. The cleaning crew used religiously. Detective Martinez's desk sat in the corner, strategically positioned so she could see everyone coming and going while maintaining some semblance of privacy for sensitive calls. Her partner, Detective Mike Chen, no relation to the psychologist, dropped into the chair across from her desk with a heavy sigh. At 45, Mike had seen enough dead-end cases to recognize the signs. "Still nothing from the pawn shops?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Nothing," Martinez confirmed, tapping her pen against the Rodriguez file. "I personally visited every electronics store, pawn shop, and second-hand dealer within a 50-mile radius. The laptop, tablet, and jewelry have vanished like they never existed." Mike leaned back in his chair, making it creak ominously. "What about the neighbors? Anyone see anything unusual that morning?" Martinez pulled out her notebook. Though she could recite the information from memory, Mrs. Patterson next door was the one who found the scene, but she was inside making Emma's breakfast when it happened. Mr. Thompson, on the other side, was that his cardiologist appointment time verified it personally with the doctor's office. The Garcias across the street both worked night shifts and were asleep. The Johnsons, the houses down, were already at work. Security cameras? That's the really frustrating part. Martinez stood up and walked to the caseboard, pointing at a neighborhood map marked with red X's. The Ramirez house has cameras, but they only cover their front door and driveway. The Lees have a system, but it's been broken for 6 months. And the one house with a clear view of the Rodriguez backyard? Their camera was mysteriously repositioned the night before the break-in. Now it only shows their pool area. Mike raised an eyebrow. Reposition? That's suspicious. That's what I thought. But it turns out their teenage son Marcus had a pool party that weekend and didn't want his parents monitoring his friends. He admitted to moving it and forgot to move it back. The kid's alibi checks out. He was at school when the break-in happened. Detective Martinez returned to her desk and opened another folder. But here's what really bothers me, Mike. This wasn't some crackhead looking for a quick score. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. She spread out crime scene photos across her desk. Look at this. They bypassed the expensive sound system in the living room. It would have been heavy and hard to carry. They ignored the 60-inch TV mounted on the wall. But they took the laptop from the kitchen counter, knew exactly where to find the jewelry box in the master bedroom, and somehow located $300 in cash that was hidden behind cookbooks. Mike studied the photos with renewed interest. Inside knowledge. That's what I keep coming back to. Maria Rodriguez says she's lived there for 4 years, but she's been pretty private about her personal life. Works at Desert Smiles Dental Clinic, doesn't date much, keeps mostly to herself. And Emma? What about Emma's father? Martinez flipped through her notes. David Rodriguez. But he's been out of the picture since Emma was 6 months old. Currently serving a 2-year sentence in Florence State Prison for armed robbery. Solid alibi. He's been locked up the entire time. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Rebecca Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Emma. Dr. Chen was a small woman in her early 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the sort of patient demeanor that came from years of working with traumatized children. Detective Martinez, I just finished my 4th session with Emma Rodriguez, Dr. Chen said, settling into the chair Mike had vacated. I'm afraid I don't have much progress to report. What's she telling you? Martinez asked, though she suspected she already knew. The answer? Dr. Chen opened her own file folder, revealing children's drawings in bright crayon colors. She's incredibly artistic for her age, and very verbal about everything except the break-in. She'll talk about her preschool friends, her favorite TV shows, what she wants to be when she grows up, a veterinarian, by the way. But the moment I try to steer the conversation toward that morning, she shuts down completely. She handed Martinez several drawings. These are from our sessions. Notice anything? Martinez studied the artwork. Every drawing featured the same elements: a house with a large dog, sometimes a little girl figure, occasionally what looked like a man in the distance. The dog was always prominent, drawn with careful attention to detail that was remarkable for a 3-year-old. She draws dogs in every picture, Martinez observed. Exactly. And when I ask her about the dogs, she becomes very animated. She tells me all about different breeds, their colors, their personalities. It's like she has an encyclopedic knowledge of dogs for someone who doesn't own one. Mike returned with fresh coffee and peered over Martinez's shoulder at the drawings. Maybe she wants a dog. I asked Maria about that. Dr. Chen continued. Apparently Emma has been begging for a dog for months, but their apartment complex doesn't allow pets. Maria promised they'd get one when they moved to a house with a yard. Martinez set down the drawings and rubbed her temples. So we have a 3-year-old who won't talk about the most important day of her life, but draws pictures of dogs and points at the neighbor's house when asked about the bad man. There's something else, Dr. Chen said quietly. During our last session, Emma said something interesting. She was coloring a picture of a dog and mentioned that big dogs make the scared feelings go away. When I asked her what scared feelings, she said the ones that come when grown-ups ask too many questions. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Emma associated safety with dogs and fear with adult questioning. Martinez's phone rang. Interrupting her thoughts, Martinez, she answered curtly, "Detective, this is Captain Rodriguez." Her supervisor's voice carried the tone of someone delivering bad news. "I need to see you in my office now." The captain's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. Captain Rodriguez, who shared a surname with the victims but no relation, was a 25-year veteran with gray hair and tired eyes. He gestured for Martinez to sit across from his cluttered desk. "Sarah, I know you've been working the Rodriguez case hard, but I'm getting pressure from upstairs. We've got 12 new cases this month, including the homicides and an armed robbery series. I need you to start focusing on cases we can actually solve." Martinez felt her jaw tighten. "Captain, I know Emma Rodriguez saw who did this. She's the key to solving this case. A 3-year-old who won't talk isn't a key, detective. She's a tragedy, but she's not evidence." Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. "I'm not closing the case, but I am reassigning it to the cold case unit. You can still work it when you have time, but it can't be your primary focus anymore, sir. With respect, it's not a request. Martinez, that little girl has been through enough. Maybe it's time to let her heal instead of pushing her to relive her trauma." As Martinez walked back to her desk, the feet settled over her shoulders like a heavy coat. 3 weeks of investigation, and she was no closer to answers than she'd been standing in that destroyed living room that evening as she drove home through the quiet suburban streets. Martinez found herself taking a detour past the Rodriguez house. The sliding door had been repaired, new locks installed, and life seemed to be returning to normal. But as she slowed near the driveway, something caught her eye. Emma was in her backyard playhouse again, but she wasn't alone. A golden retriever from somewhere in the neighborhood had somehow gotten into the yard and was sitting patiently beside the pink plastic castle. Emma was chattering away to the dog with animated gestures, her face more alive and expressive than Martinez had ever seen it. The dog listened with the kind of attention that only animals seem capable of, occasionally tilting its head as if asking questions. Emma responded by petting the dog's head and whispering what looked like secrets into its fur. Martinez sat in her car for several minutes, watching this interaction with growing fascination. Here was the same child who wouldn't speak to trained professionals, sharing what appeared to be an entire conversation with a strange dog. As she finally drove away, an idea began forming in her mind. It was unconventional, possibly crazy, but after 3 weeks of conventional investigation leading nowhere, maybe crazy was exactly what this case needed. Maybe Emma Rodriguez didn't need another human trying to unlock her secrets. Maybe she needed a dog. Detective Sarah Martinez had barely slept the night after witnessing Emma's animated conversation with a neighborhood dog. By 6 a.m., she was already at her desk, furiously researching something she'd never considered before: animal-assisted therapy in criminal investigations. Her computer screen glowed in the pre-dawn darkness of the Phoenix Police Department, showing academic papers and case studies from across the country, working early or working late. Detective Mike Chen's voice startled her from her research. He stood in the doorway holding the steaming cups of coffee, looking like he'd had about as much sleep as she had. "Early," Martinez replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Mike, what do you know about therapy dogs? My sister uses one at the children's hospital where she works." "Why?" He settled into his chair, noting the intensity in his partner's eyes. "Please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." Martinez turned her monitor so he could see the research. "Look at this. The University of California did a study on children with selective mutism, kids who can speak but choose not to in certain situations due to trauma. When they introduced therapy dogs into the treatment protocol, communication improved by 68%. Mike leaned forward, scanning the academic papers scattered across her desk. "Sarah, that's medical treatment, not criminal investigation. There's a difference, is there?" Though, Martinez pulled up another article. "Look at this case from Portland, Oregon. A 5-year-old witnessed a domestic violence incident, but wouldn't talk to investigators. They brought in a therapy dog, and the child opened up within hours. The testimony led to a conviction. That's one case. Here's another from Dallas. A 7-year-old sexual assault victim, and here's one from Denver involving a 6-year-old who witnessed a murder." Martinez's excitement was building. "Mike, Emma Rodriguez talks to dogs. I saw it with my own eyes. She was having a full conversation with that retriever yesterday." Mike studied the research with growing interest despite his skepticism. "Even if this works, and that's a big if, where are we going to find a therapy dog trained for police work? It's not like we can just borrow someone's pet." Martinez grinned. "That's where things get interesting. Apparently, our own department has been quietly developing a K-9 therapy program for the past 2 years. I found it buried in the budget reports from last year. She pulled out a folder she compiled during her early morning research. Officer, Tom Bradley has been training therapy dogs specifically for victim assistance. The program was supposed to launch 6 months ago, but it got delayed due to budget constraints. But the dogs are trained and ready, and you want to be there first. Official case. I want to give Emma Rodriguez her voice back. 3 hours later, Martinez found herself standing in the parking lot behind the police station, watching Officer Tom Bradley load equipment into his patrol SUV. Bradley was a 15-year veteran of the force, a gentle giant of a man who stood 6'4", but moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working with frightened victims. Detective Martinez. Bradley extended a hand the size of a baseball mitt. I got your message about the Rodriguez case. I have to say, I've been waiting for an opportunity like this. Tell me about the program, Martinez said, genuinely curious. Bradley's face lit up with enthusiasm. I started training therapy dogs after my daughter was in a car accident 3 years ago. She was so traumatized she wouldn't speak to doctors, counselors, anyone. But there was this golden retriever at the physical therapy center who somehow got through to her. That's when I realized dogs could reach places and people that humans couldn't touch. He opened the back of his SUV, revealing a carefully organized mobile unit, soft blankets, toys, treats, and specialized equipment designed for working with trauma victims. The department finally approved the program after we saw success rates from other cities. We have 3 dogs fully trained and certified. Tell me about them. Well, there's Bella, a chocolate lab who specializes in working with elderly victims of financial crimes. She's incredibly patient and calm. Then there's Rex, a German Shepherd mix who works mainly with teenage victims of violence. He's got this protective instinct that helps kids feel safe. Martinez waited, sensing Bradley was saving the best for last. And then there's Duke. Bradley's smile was pure pride. Duke is special. He's a 2-year-old golden retriever with what I can only describe as supernatural empathy. He can read children like they're open books. In training, he consistently connected with kids who had been written off as uncommunicative. Where is he now? Getting his morning exercise with Sergeant Williams. But detective, I should warn you, Duke isn't just any therapy dog. He's been trained specifically for trauma response. He can sense fear, anxiety, even deception. Some of the trainers think he's almost psychic, as if summoned by their conversation. Sergeant Williams appeared around the corner of the building with the most magnificent dog Martinez had ever seen. Duke was a golden retriever in his prime, with a coat that seemed to catch and reflect sunlight like spun gold. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold, deep brown pools of intelligence and compassion that seemed to understand human pain on a level she'd never seen in an animal. Duke trotted directly to Martinez and sat at her feet, looking up at her with those remarkable eyes. Without thinking, she reached down to pet him and felt an immediate sense of calm wash over her. He likes you, Bradley observed. That's a good sign. Duke is pretty selective about the humans he trusts. Sergeant Williams, a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair, approached with Duke's leash. Tom's been telling me about your case. A 3-year-old witness who won't talk to humans, Martinez corrected. But yesterday I watched her have what looked like a full conversation with a neighborhood dog. Williams and Bradley exchanged glances. That's exactly the kind of case Duke was trained for, Williams said. Children who've experienced trauma often find it easier to communicate with animals because dogs don't judge, don't pressure, and don't have hidden agendas. Bradley knelt down beside Duke, who immediately gave him his full attention. Duke's training is based on something called non-directive communication. He doesn't try to get information from children. Instead, he creates a safe space where they feel comfortable sharing whatever they need to share. How does it work practically? Martinez asked. We set up a comfortable environment, usually not a police station. Duke just spends time with the child, playing, cuddling, being present. Children naturally start talking to him like they would a beloved pet. The difference is that Duke has been trained to respond in ways that encourage continued communication. Williams added, the sessions are recorded with parental consent, but Duke isn't trying to solve crimes. He's trying to help children process their trauma. Sometimes, in the course of that healing, important information emerges. Martinez looked down at Duke, who had moved to sit beside her, his warm body pressed against her leg in a gesture of comfort she hadn't realized she needed. What do you need from me to make this happen? Permission from your captain, consent from the child's mother, and approval from the assigned psychologist, Bradley listed, and detective. You need to understand that this might not work. Emma might not connect with Duke the way she did with that neighborhood dog. Trauma responses are unpredictable, but if it does work, Bradley's smile was confident. If it works, you might be surprised what a 3-year-old will tell her new best friend. An hour later, Martinez sat in Dr. Rebecca Chen's office, Duke lying calmly at her feet while she explained the proposal. Dr. Chen listened intently, occasionally reaching down to pet Duke, who seemed to sense her initial skepticism and was working his magic charm. I've read about animal-assisted therapy, Dr. Chen said slowly, but I've never used it in conjunction with a criminal investigation. Think of it as therapy first, investigation second. Martinez suggested Emma needs to heal from her trauma. If she happens to share information that helps us catch the person who hurt her, that's a bonus. Dr. Chen studied Duke, who had positioned himself where he could see both women, his intelligent eyes tracking their conversation. There's something about him, she admitted. I can see why children would trust him. Will you support the request? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. If Maria Rodriguez consents, and if Captain Rodriguez approves, I think this could actually be beneficial for Emma's recovery, regardless of any investigative value. As they prepared to leave Dr. Chen's office, Duke did something that made both women pause. He walked over to the drawings Emma had made during her sessions, the ones featuring houses and dogs, and gently placed his paw on one of them, as if he recognized something familiar. I think, Dr. Chen said quietly, Duke already knows exactly who he's going to meet. That afternoon, as Martinez prepared to make the call to Maria Rodriguez that could change everything, she looked down at Duke, who had somehow become her shadow for the day. The dog looked back at her with those impossibly wise eyes, and for a moment, she could have sworn he winked. Okay, Duke, she whispered. Let's go give a little girl back her voice. The Phoenix Police Department's community room had been transformed into something that looked more like a child's dream playroom than an official government facility. Soft pastel colors replaced the institutional beige walls, thanks to a hurried paint job by Officer Bradley and 3 volunteers from the Victim Services Unit, who had worked through the weekend. Colorful foam mats covered the cold linoleum floor, and carefully selected toys, nothing too stimulating. Nothing that could be construed as weapons filled low shelves around the perimeter. Detective Sarah Martinez stood by the window, watching Maria Rodriguez park her Honda Civic in the visitor's lot. Her hands were damp with nervous sweat, and she found herself second-guessing this unconventional approach for the 100th time since yesterday's planning meeting. 3 weeks of traditional investigation had yielded nothing. One therapy dog was either going to crack this case wide open or prove that she'd lost her professional judgment entirely. Second thoughts, Dr. Rebecca Chen asked, entering the room with a clipboard full of consent forms and assessment tools. She'd arrived an hour early to review the space and ensure everything met the clinical standards for trauma therapy with minors. Third and fourth thoughts, Martinez admitted, watching Emma emerge from the car in the parking lot below. The little girl wore a bright pink dress with purple butterflies, her choice, according to her mother, and carried her ever-present stuffed elephant. What if Duke doesn't connect with her the way we hope? What if we traumatize her further by pushing too hard? Dr. Chen set her clipboard on a small table decorated with crayons and coloring books. Sarah, you've seen Emma's drawings. Every single one features a dog. Yesterday, you watched her have an animated conversation with a neighborhood retriever. The foundation is already there. Officer Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway, Duke trotting calmly beside him on a loose leash. The golden retriever wore his official therapy vest royal blue, with Phoenix PD Therapy K9 embroidered in gold lettering, but his demeanor was relaxed and friendly rather than professional. His tail maintained a gentle wag, and his dark eyes surveyed the room with intelligent curiosity. How's our star performer today? Martinez asked, kneeling to Duke's level. The dog immediately approached her, pressing his warm head against her hands in a gesture that somehow managed to calm her racing heartbeat. Duke had a good breakfast and a long walk this morning, Bradley reported, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd seen his partner work miracles before. He's been through situations like this in training. He knows this room is different from our usual work environment. Dr. Chen observed Duke with professional interest. His body language is remarkably calm for a working dog in a new environment. Most police dogs would be more alert, scanning for threats. That's part of his specialized training, Bradley explained, guiding Duke to a comfortable spot on one of the foam mats. Duke has learned to compartmentalize his different roles. When he's wearing this vest, in this type of setting, he shifts into therapy mode. His stress indicators drop, his protective instincts relax, and he becomes purely focused on emotional support. A soft knock on the door announced the arrival of Maria and Emma Rodriguez. Detective Martinez felt her breath catch as she got her first good look at Emma since the initial crime scene interview. The little girl had gained weight and color in the past 3 weeks, but her dark eyes still held the hypervigilant quality that spoke of trauma unhealed. Emma entered the room, cautiously, staying close to her mother's legs while her gaze swept the space. She took in the toys, the soft lighting, the comfortable furniture, and then her eyes found Duke. The transformation was instantaneous and magical. Emma's entire posture changed. Her rigid shoulders relaxed, her defensive stance melted away, and for the first time since Detective Martinez had known her, the child's face lit up with genuine joy, not the careful politeness she showed adults, but the pure, unbridled happiness that belonged to childhood. Puppy, Emma breathed, the single word carrying more life and energy than anything Martinez had heard her say. Duke, seeming to sense the significance of this moment, remained perfectly still except for his gently wagging tail. He made no move toward Emma, understanding instinctively that she needed to be the one to initiate contact. His training had taught him that traumatized children required control over their interactions. Any perceived pressure could trigger a retreat into silence. His name is Duke, Officer Bradley said softly, settling cross-legged on a floor mat several feet away from his partner. He's been looking forward to meeting you, Emma. Emma looked up at her mother with questioning eyes, and Maria nodded encouragingly. It's okay, Mija. Duke is a special dog who helps police officers, but he's also very gentle with children. Taking tentative steps across the foam mats, Emma approached Duke with the cautious fascination of a child who desperately wanted to believe in magic, but had learned to be careful about trusting good things. Duke watched her approach with patient eyes, his head tilted slightly in an expression of friendly interest. When Emma was within arm's reach, Duke did something extraordinary. He lowered himself into a perfect down position, making himself less imposing, and then rolled partially onto his side, a gesture of complete submission and trust that dogs reserved for those they considered safe pack members. Emma giggled, the first sound of pure joy Detective Martinez had heard from her, and immediately sat down beside Duke. He's so soft, she whispered, running her small hands through his golden coat, and warm. Dr. Chen exchanged glances with the other adults in the room. In 30 seconds, Duke had accomplished what weeks of traditional therapy had failed to achieve. Emma was relaxed, engaged, and voluntarily communicating. Duke likes children, Bradley explained, careful to keep his voice gentle and non-threatening. He especially likes children who are good at telling stories. Are you good at telling stories, Emma? Emma nodded enthusiastically, her hands never stopping their gentle exploration of Duke's fur. I tell stories to my elephant every night, and sometimes to the birds in our backyard. What kind of stories do you tell? Dr. Chen asked, settling onto a nearby mat with her clipboard forgotten beside her. Happy stories mostly, Emma replied, her voice growing stronger as Duke rolled completely onto his side, inviting belly rubs. About princesses and dragons and brave knights, but sometimes her voice dropped to a whisper that only Duke seemed able to hear. Sometimes I tell scary stories too. Detective Martinez felt her heart rate spike. This was at the opening they'd been hoping for. Duke likes all kinds of stories, Bradley said carefully. He's very good at listening to scary stories because he's brave, and he knows that talking about scary things can make them less frightening. Emma considered this information while continuing to pet Duke's golden coat. The dog's breathing had slowed to a meditative rhythm, and his presence seemed to create a bubble of safety around the little girl. The elephant is good at listening to, Emma said thoughtfully, but Duke has bigger ears. Everyone in the room smiled at this perfect child logic, but it was Duke who provided the response that mattered most. He lifted his head and gently licked Emma's hand, not an aggressive or demanding gesture, but a quiet acknowledgement that he was indeed listening and ready to hear whatever she needed to tell him. Want to tell Duke about the scary story? Emma asked herself, then immediately answered in a different voice, as if Duke had responded. Okay, but just Duke. The grown-ups have to promise to be very quiet, without any prompting from the adults. Emma scooted closer to Duke and began to whisper in his ear. Her voice was too quiet for anyone else to hear, but Duke's responses, subtle ear movements, gentle tail wags, and soft huffing sounds indicated that a very real conversation was taking place. Detective Martinez watched in amazement as weeks of carefully planned traditional investigation were replaced by the simple magic of a child who had found someone she trusted enough to share her secrets with. After several minutes of whispered conversation, Emma sat back and looked directly at the adults for the first time since entering the room. Duke says, "It's okay to tell you the scary story now," she announced with newfound confidence. "But only if you promise not to get mad at the man who came to play." Duke says getting mad makes everything scarier, as Detective Martinez nodded, her agreement to Duke's wise counsel. She realized that they weren't just witnessing the beginning of Emma's healing. They were seeing the birth of an entirely new approach to helping traumatized children find their voices. The real investigation was about to begin. Emma Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the foam mat, her small hands buried deep in Duke's golden coat as she prepared to share the secret that had been locked inside her for 3 weeks. The community room seemed to hold its breath. Even the air conditioning unit had fallen silent, as if the building itself understood the gravity of this moment. "Duke wants to know about the morning when the man came to play," Emma began, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone that children used when retelling events they didn't fully understand. "I was in my castle house in the backyard, having a tea party with Mrs. Whiskers." Mrs. Whiskers, Detective Martinez remembered from the case file, was Emma's stuffed cat that had been found in the playhouse after the break-in. Duke shifted slightly, positioning himself so that Emma could lean against his warm side while she talked. Officer Bradley had explained that this physical contact often helped traumatized children feel anchored and safe during difficult recollections. "I heard the sliding door make its whooshy sound," Emma continued, unconsciously mimicking the sound of glass doors opening, "but it wasn't the normal whoosh. It was angry and loud, like when Mama gets mad at the door that sticks in the bathroom." Dr. Chen made a subtle note on her pad. Emma was describing the sound of the door being forced open, but processing it through a child's understanding of familiar household sounds. "I looked through my castle window, the pink one, with the flower stickers, and I saw him." Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and Duke responded by gently nuzzling her arm. "At first, I thought he was playing a game because he was being sneaky quiet, like when we play hide and seek." Detective Martinez felt her pulse quicken. This was already more detailed than Emma had provided in any previous interview. "Tell Duke what the man looked like," Dr. Chen encouraged softly, careful not to disrupt the flow of Emma's narrative. Emma buried her face in Duke's neck for a moment, drawing strength from his steady presence. He had hair on his face, like Daddy's friend Carlos, who used to live with us. Dark hair that was fuzzy. She traced shapes in Duke's fur as she spoke, as if drawing the memory with her fingers, and he wore the same kind of blue shirts that Carlos likes, the ones with the little horse on them. Detective Martinez's breath caught. Polo shirts. Carlos Mendez always wore polo shirts. "But Duke," Emma continued, her voice taking on a tone of confused hurt, "the man knew things he shouldn't know. He knew where Mama keeps her sparkly necklaces in the special box behind the picture of Grandma Rosa. He knew which drawer has the money for pizza. He even knew that the back door key is hidden under the frog statue." The room fell silent except for Duke's gentle breathing. Emma was describing someone with intimate knowledge of the household, not a random burglar, but someone who had lived there, who knew every hiding place and routine. "Did the man see you in your castle house?" Officer Bradley asked gently, maintaining the fiction that these questions were coming from Duke. Emma nodded solemnly. "When he came back from Mama's room with the sparkly box, he looked right at me through the big glass door, but instead of being surprised, he smiled and waved, like this." Emma demonstrated a casual, friendly wave. "He said, 'Hi there, little princess. Just borrowing some things for work.'" Detective Martinez exchanged glances with Dr. Chen. This wasn't the behavior of a stranger caught in the act. This was someone comfortable enough to acknowledge the child's presence without panic. "What happened next?" Dr. Chen prompted. Emma's expression grew troubled as she pressed closer to Duke's warm body. "He came outside and walked over to my castle. He kneeled down so his face was by my window, and he said, 'Emma, you know how sometimes grown-ups have to borrow things from each other, like when your mama borrows sugar from Mrs. Patterson.'" The little girl's voice shifted. taking on a deeper tone as she mimicked the man's words. I'm just borrowing some things from your mama because she borrowed something from me and forgot to give it back. But this has to be our special secret, okay? Because if other people find out about borrowing games, it makes everyone very sad. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. This was emotional manipulation of a child, sophisticated and calculated. Tell Duke what you said to the man, she encouraged. I asked him if Mama knew about the borrowing game, Emma replied, her innocent question revealing the instinctive wisdom that often guided children through dangerous situations. And he got a funny look on his face, not mad, but like when you're trying to think of the right answer for a hard question. Emma paused to pet Duke's ears, which had perked up slightly as if he too was processing the significance of her words. He said, your mama is at work helping people with their teeth, so I thought I'd surprise her by taking care of the borrowing while she's busy. But surprises only work if they're secrets. Can you keep the surprise secret until I talk to your mama tonight? Detective Martinez realized she was witnessing a masterclass in how predators manipulated children, turning criminal behavior into games, making children complicit in keeping secrets, using adult concepts that children couldn't fully understand but felt compelled to respect. What did you tell the man? Officer Bradley asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger Martinez could see building in his eyes. I told him I'm very good at keeping secrets, Emma replied with the pride of a child who had been praised for this skill. But then, I asked him why he looked so sad if it was supposed to be a happy surprise. Duke shifted position, somehow sensing that this was the crucial moment in Emma's story. And that's when his face changed. Emma continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. It got scary angry, like when thunder is coming. He said, sometimes grown-ups get very sad when they don't have enough money to take care of people they love. Your mama has lots of money and pretty things, and I don't have any. That's not fair. Is it, Emma? The room was completely silent now. Emma was describing a man driven by resentment and desperation, someone who felt entitled to take what he believed was owed to him. Did he say anything else? Dr. Chen asked. Emma nodded, her small body trembling slightly despite Duke's comforting presence. He said, I used to live here and help take care of you and your mama, but she decided she didn't need my help anymore. That made me very sad because I still care about both of you. I'm just taking back some things that should have been mine anyway. Detective Martinez felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Carlos Mendez hadn't just been Maria's boyfriend. He'd been living there as part of the family. The break-in wasn't random crime or even simple revenge. It was the desperate act of someone who felt abandoned and entitled. Someone who believed he had a right to compensation for his lost domestic partnership. Emma, Dr. Chen said gently, you've been so brave telling Duke this story. Is there anything else? The man said before he left. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hands working through Duke's fur as she gathered courage for the hardest part of her story. He kneeled down again and looked right into my castle window, she finally said. His voice got soft and scary at the same time. He said, Emma, if you tell anyone about our borrowing game before I talk to your mama, something very bad might happen to her at work. There are lots of dangerous tools at the dentist office, and accidents can happen when people get upset about secrets being told. The threat hung in the air like poison. Carlos Mendez hadn't just manipulated a 3-year-old into silence. He had threatened her mother's safety to ensure Emma's compliance. But Duke, Emma continued, looking up at the golden retriever with absolute trust, you're stronger than scary men, aren't you? And Detective Sarah has a gun to protect people, right? So the man can't hurt Mama now? Duke responded by gently licking Emma's face, as she giggled, the first sound of pure joy she had made since beginning her story. Duke says you're the bravest little girl he's ever met, Officer Bradley interpreted, his voice thick with emotion. And he's right. You just helped us make sure that man can never scare you or your mama again. As Emma settled more comfortably against Duke's side, chattering about whether he liked tea parties and stuffed animals, Detective Martinez realized that this precious child had just provided them with everything they needed to arrest Carlos Mendez for burglary, intimidation, and making terrorist threats against a minor. But more importantly, Emma Rodriguez had finally found her voice. Detective Sarah Martinez sat in her car outside Carlos Mendez's apartment complex at 5:47 a.m., watching the sun paint the Phoenix sky in shades of amber and rose. She'd been there since for 30, armed with Emma's devastating testimony in a search warrant that had been signed by Judge Morrison at midnight. But this wasn't just about executing an arrest anymore, this was personal. The man sleeping in apartment to be had terrorized a 3-year-old child, and Martinez intended to make sure he never got the chance to hurt another innocent victim, her. Phone buzzed with a text from Officer Bradley. Duke sends his regards. Emma slept through the night for the first time in 3 weeks. The message brought a grim smile to Martinez's face. While Emma was finally beginning to heal, Carlos Mendez was about to discover that his carefully planned crime had unraveled in the most unexpected way possible. Detective Mike Chen pulled up beside her in his unmarked sedan, followed by two patrol units and Officer Bradley with Duke in the K9 vehicle. They requested Duke's presence not for his therapy skills, but for his remarkable ability to detect deception and hidden evidence. If Carlos had stashed stolen items or evidence in his apartment, Duke would find them. Warren solid? Chen asked, approaching Martinez's car with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Airtight, Martinez confirmed, accepting the coffee gratefully. Emma's testimony gives us probable cause for burglary, intimidation of a witness, making terroristic threats against a minor, and violation of a restraining order. Judge Morrison was not happy about the threats against a 3-year-old. Chen studied the apartment building, a rundown complex where paint peeled from the stucco walls, and several windows were covered with cardboard instead of glass. What do we know about his current situation? Martinez opened her case file, which had tripled in size over the past 18 hours of intensive investigation. Carlos Mendez, 31 years old, unemployed for 6 weeks after being fired from Desert Electronics for theft. He's got 2 prior convictions for domestic violence, both with previous girlfriends. His truck has been repossessed. He's 3 months behind on rent, and his credit cards are maxed out. Desperate man, Chen observed. Desperate and angry, Martinez corrected. I interviewed his former boss at Desert Electronics yesterday evening. Apparently, Carlos had been skimming cash from the register for months when they caught him. He blamed his financial problems on Maria Rodriguez, claiming she destroyed his life by ending their relationship. Officer Bradley joined them, Duke sitting calmly at his side, even at this early hour. The dog was alert and professional, his therapy vest replaced by his official police harness. Emma's mother provided us with some interesting background information. Yesterday after the interview, Bradley reported, Carlos had been pressuring Maria to let him move back in, claiming he changed and needed another chance. When she refused, he became increasingly aggressive. Martinez felt her jaw tighten. Define aggressive: showing up at her workplace uninvited, calling repeatedly, driving past her house at night. Maria filed a restraining order 2 weeks ago, but it hasn't been served yet because we couldn't locate Carlos. Well, we know where he is now, Chen said grimly. The apartment complex began showing signs of life as residents prepared for work and school. Martinez watched Carlos's second-floor window, noting that the curtains remained drawn and no lights had appeared, according to his neighbors. Carlos had been keeping irregular hours since losing his job, often staying up until dawn and sleeping well into the afternoon. Vehicle situation? Martinez asked. His truck was repossessed 3 weeks ago, Chen reported, consulting his notes. But according to surveillance footage from the gas station near Maria's house, he's been driving a red Chevy pickup that belongs to his brother Miguel. Miguel claims he didn't know Carlos was using it for illegal activities, but he's agreed to cooperate with our investigation. Martinez's phone rang the forensics lab, calling with results from evidence they'd collected during their initial investigation of the Rodriguez house. Martinez, she answered. Detective, this is Kim at the lab. We found something interesting. On that jewelry box from the Rodriguez break-in, there are fingerprints that don't belong to the family, and we got a hit in the system. Let me guess, Carlos Mendez. Bingo. But here's the interesting part. The prints aren't just on the exterior of the box. They're on individual jewelry pieces, and the pattern suggests he was examining items carefully, not just grabbing everything in sight. Martinez felt a surge of satisfaction. He was being selective, taking pieces he knew were valuable. Exactly. This wasn't a desperate grab and run. Someone took time to evaluate what they were stealing. After hanging up, Martinez briefed her team on the forensic evidence. The fingerprints, combined with Emma's testimony, created an ironclad case against Carlos. But as she studied the apartment building, Martinez realized they were dealing with more than just a burglary suspect. They were confronting a man whose desperation had escalated to threatening a child. Chen, Take the back exit with Uni 2. Martinez ordered. Bradley, you and Duke cover the stairs in case he tries to run. Uni 1, you're with me at the front door. As they moved into position, Martinez's mind raced through the tactical considerations. Carlos had military training from his time in the National Guard, which meant he might not surrender peacefully. More concerning was his apparent lack of remorse for involving Emma in his crime. A man willing to threaten a 3-year-old was capable of unpredictable violence. The hallway outside apartment to be smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial carpet cleaner. Martinez positioned herself beside the door while Officer Rodriguez, the same uniformed officer who'd responded to the original call, prepared to announce their presence. The irony wasn't lost on Martinez that Officer Rodriguez would be part of arresting the man who'd terrorized the family whose name he shared. Phoenix Police, search warrant. Officer Rodriguez called out, pounding on the door with authority that echoed through the narrow hallway. The response was immediate, the sound of someone scrambling inside the apartment, followed by what sounded like items being hastily moved or hidden. Martinez heard footsteps running toward the back of the apartment and radioed Chen. He's heading for the rear exit. Copy that. We've got eyes on the back door, Chen responded. But instead of attempting to flee, the footsteps returned to the front of the apartment. After several long moments, the door opened to reveal Carlos Mendez, and Martinez was struck by how much he'd changed since the photo in Maria's case file. The man standing before them bore little resemblance to the confident, well-groomed boyfriend. In Maria's family pictures, Carlos looked like he'd aged a decade in the past month. His dark hair was unkempt, his face showed several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes were wrinkled and stained. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They held the desperate, cornered look of someone who knew his world was collapsing. Carlos Mendez, Martinez said, her hand resting on her service weapon. I'm Detective Martinez, Phoenix PD. We have a warrant to search these premises. I don't know what you think you're going to find, Carlos replied, but his voice lacked conviction. His gaze darted nervously between the officers, and Martinez noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Step aside, sir, Officer Rodriguez ordered, and Carlos reluctantly moved back into his apartment. The small studio apartment told the story of a man in free fall. Empty beer bottles covered every surface, unpaid bills were scattered across a card table that served as a desk, and the air reeked of unwashed laundry and desperation. But it was what Martinez saw on the kitchen counter that made her heart race with vindication. Maria Rodriguez's laptop sat open next to a pile of jewelry that Martinez recognized from the crime scene photos. Carlos hadn't even tried to hide the evidence. Either he'd been too desperate to think clearly, or he'd convinced himself that a 3-year-old's testimony would never be believed in court. Carlos Mendez, Martinez said, pulling out her handcuffs, you're under arrest for burglary, intimidation of a witness, making terroristic threats against a minor, and violation of a restraining order. As she read him his rights, Carlos's composure finally cracked. She destroyed my life, he shouted, his voice echoing off the thin apartment walls. I gave Maria everything, my time, my money, my love, as she threw me away like garbage when she decided she didn't need me anymore. You threatened a 3-year-old child, Martinez said coldly, securing the handcuffs. Emma Rodriguez trusted you, and you used that trust to terrorize her into silence. Carlos's face went pale. She wasn't supposed to see anything. I timed it so she'd be at the babysitter's house. It was just supposed to be quick, take what was rightfully mine, and leave. But Emma came home early, Martinez continued, and instead of stopping, you decided to turn a scared little girl into an accomplice to your crime. The fight seemed to go out of Carlos all at once. His shoulders sagged, and he looked around his squalid apartment as if seeing it clearly for the first time. I never meant to scare her. I couldn't let Maria get away with ruining my life without consequences. As they led Carlos out of the apartment building in handcuffs, Martinez thought about Emma Rodriguez, who was probably eating breakfast and chattering to her mother about her new friend Duke. The 3-year-old who had been too terrified to speak 3 weeks ago had found her voice and helped bring her tormentor to justice. Carlos Mendez had made a fatal mistake when he decided to involve an innocent child. In his quest for revenge, he'd underestimated the power of a little girl's memory, the dedication of investigators who refused to give up, and the healing magic of a therapy dog who could unlock secrets that traditional methods couldn't touch. Justice, Martinez reflected, sometimes arrived off her pause and spoke through the smallest voices. 6 months after Carlos Mendez's arrest, the Maricopa County Superior Court buzzed with an energy that veteran court reporters hadn't witnessed in decades. Courtroom 3B, normally reserved for routine criminal proceedings, had been transformed into the epicenter of what legal scholars were already calling the most significant case in the history of child witness testimony. Every seat in the gallery was occupied, with overflow crowds gathered in the hallway, and news trucks lined the street outside like modern-day covered wagons. Circling for the story of the century, Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom at precisely 9 a.m., her black robes flowing behind her as she surveyed the packed gallery with eyes that had seen 30 years of human drama unfold in this very room. At 62, Judge Morrison had presided over thousands of cases, but never one that would potentially rewrite the fundamental rules of how the justice system interacted with its youngest and most vulnerable witnesses. "All rise," announced the bailiff, and the courtroom erupted in a symphony of shuffling feet and rustling papers as nearly 200 people stood in unison. "Be seated," Judge Morrison commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never tolerated nonsense in her courtroom. "We are here today in the matter of State of Arizona versus Carlos Roberto Mendez, case number CR-0-300-4751. This proceeding will determine whether testimony obtained through animal-assisted therapy with a minor witness may be admitted as evidence in a criminal trial." In the front row of the gallery, Detective Sarah Martinez sat beside Maria Rodriguez, both women holding their breath as they watched the legal system grapple with the unprecedented situation Emma's courage had created. Behind them sat Officer Tom Bradley, Duke lying calmly at his feet in his official therapy vest, ready to provide support if Emma needed him during the proceedings. Emma herself sat in a specially designed witness chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her small stature, her legs swinging gently as she clutched her ever-present stuffed elephant. At 4 years old now, she had grown more confident and articulate, but the courtroom setting still intimidated her despite weeks of preparation with Dr. Rebecca Chen. Defense attorney Michael Ross, a silver-haired veteran of high-profile criminal cases, rose from his table with the practiced confidence of someone who had built his career on finding technicalities that could free guilty clients. "Your Honor," he began, his voice resonating through the packed courtroom, "the state is asking this court to accept as evidence the alleged statements of a 3-year-old child to a dog, not to a trained psychologist, not to a law enforcement officer, but to an animal incapable of cross-examination or verification." Ross paced before the bench, his expensive suit and polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. "The defendant has a constitutional right to confront his accusers. How can Mr. Mendez cross-examine a golden retriever? How can we verify the accuracy of statements allegedly made in a language that only humans understand? This so-called evidence violates every principle of due process and reliable testimony that our legal system is built upon," the gallery murmured with nervous energy, and Judge Morrison's sharp gaze silenced them instantly. "Continue, Mr. Ross." "Furthermore, Your Honor, children of such tender age are notoriously unreliable witnesses. Their memories are malleable, their understanding of truth versus fiction is underdeveloped, and they are highly susceptible to suggestion from adults who might have predetermined conclusions about what happened. The state's entire case rests upon the fantasy conversations of a traumatized toddler with a pet." Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh rose to respond, her measured voice cutting through the tension like a surgical blade. At 45, Walsh had built her reputation on protecting victims who couldn't protect themselves, and she had spent months preparing for this moment. "Your Honor," Walsh began, "Mr. Ross would have this court believe that innovation in helping trauma victims find their voices somehow undermines the pursuit of justice." But Emma Rodriguez didn't tell Duke of Fantasy. She provided specific, verifiable details that led directly to physical evidence, the defendant's confession, and his conviction on multiple felony charges. Walsh moved to the prosecution table and lifted a thick folder. "The state will demonstrate that Emma's statements to Officer Duke were spontaneous, consistent across multiple sessions, and contained details that only the perpetrator or an eyewitness could have known." She described Mr. Mendez's clothing, his knowledge of the household layout, his specific threats against her mother, and his psychological manipulation tactics, all of which were subsequently corroborated by physical evidence and the defendant's own admissions. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Ms. Walsh, addressed the court's concern about the reliability of statements made to an animal, rather than a human interviewer. Gladly, Your Honor, Dr. Rebecca Chen will testify that children often communicate more honestly with animals than with humans, because animals represent safety without judgment. Emma's statements to Duke were recorded on video, allowing this court to observe her demeanor, spontaneity, and emotional responses. These recordings show a child processing trauma in real time, not reciting coach responses. Walsh paused, allowing her words to sink in before delivering her most powerful argument. Your Honor, we're not asking this court to accept the testimony of a dog. We're asking you to accept the testimony of a brave little girl who found her voice through an innovative therapeutic intervention. Duke didn't testify, Emma did. Duke simply provided the emotional safety that allowed her to speak her truth. Dr. Chen was called as the first expert witness, her credentials filling the full pages as she was qualified to testify about childhood trauma, memory formation, and animal-assisted therapy. Her testimony painted a picture of Emma's transformation, from selective mutism to confident communication, emphasizing the therapeutic value rather than the investigative convenience of the dog's presence. Dr. Chen, Walsh asked, in your professional opinion, did Emma's relationship with Officer Duke enhance or compromise the reliability of her statements? It enhanced them significantly, Dr. Chen replied without hesitation. Traumatized children often struggle with fragmented memories and emotional overwhelm. Duke's presence allowed Emma to process her memories in a calm, non-threatening environment. The resulting narrative was more complete and detailed than anything we could have obtained through traditional interview methods. Ross's cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. Dr. Chen calmly explained that Emma's statements had been subjected to the same verification protocols used for any child witness, and that multiple sessions had produced consistent details that proved accurate when investigated. Officer Bradley's testimony about Duke's training and the therapeutic protocols drew gasps from the gallery as he explained the rigorous certification process that qualified Duke for this specialized work. Duke doesn't lead children towards specific answers, Bradley explained. He simply creates an environment where they feel safe enough to share their experiences. When Emma herself was called to testify, the courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Morrison had arranged for Duke to accompany her to the witness stand, understanding that the child's emotional well-being took precedence over courtroom tradition. Emma, Judge Morrison said gently, can you tell us about your friend Duke? Emma's face brightened immediately. Duke is my best friend. He listens to all my secrets and makes the scary feelings go away. When I told him about the bad man who came to our house, Duke made me feel brave enough to tell the truth. And what did you tell Duke about that day? Emma looked directly at Carlos Mendez, sitting at the defense table, and her voice rang out, clear and strong. I told Duke that Mr. Carlos came to our house when Mama was at work and took her computer and pretty jewelry. He told me it was a secret game, but it wasn't really a game because games are supposed to be fun, and I felt scared. The simplicity and clarity of her statement hit the courtroom like a physical force. Here was a child who had found the courage to face her tormentor and speak her truth, armed with nothing but her stuffed elephant and the memory of a golden retriever who had taught her that scary truths were less frightening when shared with someone who loved you unconditionally. Ross's attempts to cross-examine Emma were gentle but futile. The child answered each question with the same straightforward honesty she had shown Duke, never wavering from her account of that terrifying morning. As the testimony phase concluded, Judge Morrison announced that she would recess for deliberation on this groundbreaking legal question. The courtroom slowly emptied, but Emma remained in the witness chair, whispering to her elephant about how proud Duke would be that she had been so brave. The future of animal-assisted testimony hung in the balance, waiting for one judge's decision that would either open new doors for helping traumatized children or close them forever. The 3 hours of deliberation felt like 3 lifetimes to everyone gathered in the corridors outside courtroom 3B. Detective Sarah Martinez paced the marble floors like a caged panther, while Maria Rodriguez sat on a wooden bench, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Emma had fallen asleep in her mother's lap, exhausted by the emotional weight of her testimony, her stuffed elephant tucked securely under her chin and Duke lying protectively at their feet. When the bailiff finally announced that Judge Morrison was ready to deliver her ruling, the courtroom filled with an electric anticipation that seemed to charge the very air. Legal scholars from across the country had traveled to Phoenix for this moment, understanding that whatever Judge Morrison decided would ripple through every courthouse in America. For decades to come, Judge Morrison entered the courtroom carrying a thick folder of legal precedents and research that had consumed her weekend. Her usually composed expression revealed nothing, but those who knew her well could see the weight of this historic decision in a careful way. She arranged her papers and the deliberate pause she took before speaking. "Please be seated," she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. "In my 30 years on this bench, I'd have never faced a decision with more far-reaching implications for how our justice system serves its most vulnerable victims." Emma sat up straighter in her special chair, somehow sensing that this moment was important even if she didn't fully understand why. Duke, reading the tension in the room, with his remarkable emotional intelligence, moved closer to the witness stand where he could offer silent support. "The question before this court," Judge Morrison continued, "is not whether Emma Rodriguez is telling the truth. Her courage and honesty are beyond dispute. The question is whether our legal system can evolve to embrace innovative methods that help traumatized children find their voices without compromising the fundamental rights of the accused." She lifted the first document from her folder. "Mr. Ross has raised legitimate constitutional concerns about due process and the right to confront one's accusers. These are not trivial objections. They are the bedrock principles upon which our justice system stands." A murmur of concern rippled through the prosecution side of the gallery, but Judge Morrison raised her hand for silence. "However," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "Ms. Walsh has demonstrated that Emma's statements to Officer Duke were not the end of the investigation, but the beginning. Her testimony led to physical evidence, corroborating witnesses, and ultimately the defendant's own confession. The dog did not testify, the child did. Officer Duke merely provided the therapeutic environment that allowed her to process her trauma safely." Judge Morrison turned to look directly at Emma, her stern judicial demeanor softening as she addressed the small girl who had captured the heart of an entire legal system. "Emma Rodriguez," she said gently, "you have shown more courage and for short years than many adults display in a lifetime. Your willingness to speak your truth, even when it was frightening, has not only brought justice in your case, but has opened a new path for helping other children who have been hurt by bad people." Emma beamed at the praise, then leaned over to whisper something to Duke, who responded with a gentle tail wag that drew smiles from even the most hardened court reporters. "Therefore," Judge Morrison announced, her voice ringing with the authority of legal history being made, "this court finds that Emma Rodriguez's statements made during animal-assisted therapy sessions with Officer Duke are admissible as evidence. These statements were spontaneous, detailed, consistent, and led to verifiable physical evidence. The defendant's right to confrontation was satisfied through his ability to cross-examine Emma herself, not the therapeutic method by which her memories were accessed." The courtroom erupted in a controlled chaos of whispered conversations, furious note-taking by reporters, and barely contained cheers from the victim advocacy groups that had packed the gallery. Judge Morrison's gavel brought order back to the proceedings. "Furthermore," she continued, "this court hereby establishes the Morrison Protocol for Animal-Assisted Child Witness Testimony." The name would stick. Martinez realized legal scholars would be citing the Morrison Protocol for generations. These guidelines will ensure that therapeutic interventions like the one used in this case maintain the highest standards of reliability while protecting the constitutional rights of all parties. Defense attorney Ross stood, his professional composure intact despite his obvious disappointment. "Your Honor, we respectfully note our disagreement with this ruling and will be filing an appeal. Your right to appeal is noted and preserved, Mr. Ross," Judge Morrison replied. "However, based on the evidence presented, I am confident that this decision will withstand appellate review." She turned to the prosecution table. "Ms. Walsh, you may proceed with your sentencing recommendations." The sentencing phase moved swiftly. Carlos Mendez, who had watched his last hope for a technicality-based acquittal crumble, finally stood to address the court. His appearance had deteriorated further during the months of pretrial detention. His hair was now completely gray, his face gone from stress and poor institutional food. "Your Honor," Carlos said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want to apologize to Emma and her mother. I never intended for this to happen the way it did. I was desperate and angry, and I made choices that hurt an innocent child. I know I can't take that back." Judge Morrison studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Mendez, your actions traumatized a 3-year-old child so severely that she couldn't speak about her experience for weeks. You manipulated her innocence, threatened her mother's safety, and violated the sacred trust that children place in the adults in their lives. She paused, consulting the sentencing guidelines before her. However, this court also recognizes that your cooperation following your arrest and your eventual guilty plea have saved Emma the trauma of a prolonged trial. Taking all factors into consideration, this court sentences you to 7 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation with mandatory anger management and domestic violence counseling. As the bailiff led Carlos away in handcuffs, he stopped for a moment near the witness stand where Emma sat with Duke. "I'm sorry, little princess," he said quietly, using the same pet name that had once been part of his manipulation. But this time, Emma didn't shrink away. "Duke says people can learn to be better if they really try." Emma replied with the wisdom that only children seem to possess. "Maybe you can learn to." The courtroom fell silent at this display of forgiveness from someone so young, and more than one observer wiped away tears at the grace Emma showed her tormentor. As the court session concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Emma ran to Detective Martinez with the enthusiasm of a child who had just accomplished something important. "Detective Sarah, did we do good? Did Duke and I help catch the bad man?" Martinez knelt to Emma's level, fighting back tears of her own. "You did more than good, sweetheart. You helped create something that will protect other children for years to come." Dr. Chen joined them, her professional satisfaction evident in her smile. "Emma, because of your courage, other children who are scared to talk will have therapy dogs to help them, just like Duke helped you." Emma considered this seriously, then brightened. "That means Duke is going to be very busy. He'll need to teach lots of other police dogs how to listen to secrets." Officer Bradley, who had been quietly accepting congratulations from his colleagues, overheard Emma's comment. "Actually, Emma, Duke wanted me to tell you something special. Because you were so brave, the police department is going to train more dogs just like him. We're calling it the Emma Rodriguez K9 Therapy Program." The little girl's eyes went wide with wonder. "Really? Dogs will be named after me?" "Not just named after you," Martinez explained. "Trained because of you, because you found the courage to speak your truth. Other children will have their own Dukes to help them feel safe." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Emma skipping between her mother and Detective Martinez, Duke trotting proudly beside Officer Bradley, the afternoon sun painted the Phoenix skyline in shades of gold and hope. The media crews captured every moment, but the real story wasn't in the legal precedent or the landmark ruling. The real story was in the transformation of a terrified 3-year-old into a confident 4-year-old who had learned that even the scariest truths became manageable when shared with someone who loved you unconditionally. Whether that someone had 2 legs or 4, didn't matter. What mattered was the trust, the courage, and the unbreakable bond between a little girl and a golden retriever who had given her back her voice. 6 months later, Emma would start kindergarten with confidence and joy, her trauma transformed into strength. Duke would go on to help 17 more children find their voices over the next 3 years. And in courtrooms across America, judges would invoke the Morrison Protocol to ensure that innovation and justice walked hand in hand, protecting the innocent while preserving the rights of all. But on this day, in the warm Arizona sunshine, none of that mattered as much as the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing off the courthouse steps, free at last from the silence that had once imprisoned her.